I know I'm not a woman, so I'll just address that right off the bat if there's any confusion, and neither is my friend Fayoud Marabi.
No.
But when the women come on this stage, we're going to be talking about addressing climate change from a very high level, from capital market space and from the asset management industry. And before we did that, we just wanted to at least give you a taste of what's going on the ground and how you can see some of the action in climate really being focused more at the very ground level, and then we'll take it up to the higher level about moving capital and markets. So if you can talk a little bit about the preview that we're going to see.
Hi, my name is Farhood Beatty, and I'm the founder of Ritual Arts. I'm also a filmmaker, and I believe that storytelling is the most powerful tool we have to inspire folks to take steps towards climate mitigation and adaptation. But I think we're telling an inconsistent story when you look at the films that are distributed on a wide basis. It's a lot of doom and gloom. It's a lot of the world ending in Armageddon. And I think if you look at the data, it always shows that fear is not a long-term motivator of behavioral change. Hope, love, these are great motivators. And we shot a film called Earthbound in Nairobi, Kenya, and it profiles a brilliant entrepreneur who's taking steps to transform her community through entrepreneurship. And we're going to show you a quick little trailer right now of Earthbound.
And then I'll post on LinkedIn a QR code, so Jeffrey Gitterman at LinkedIn, where if you want to see the whole film, you can find it. So I'll do that this afternoon. We'll step over here.
Earth is an extraordinary place. Every part of this world is awe-inspiring. But this is an environmental disaster.
Kenya is one of the many countries contributing to the pollution. Hundreds of tons of plastic waste are created every day in the capital, Nairobi.
I want to do something, no matter how small, no matter how big, just something to help change this. In Kenya, there's not only a plastic waste problem, but we also have a huge paving problem. What if I could solve each problem at the same time?
She brings me a very hard stone made of plastic and sand.
Better, cheaper, and sustainable.
I'm trying to close investors, but they're not coming in.
We had spent the savings we had for the family investing in this company.
The pressure, I can feel it.
She was going to risk everything, everything.
I was the king of the jungle. Hey, hey. Mufasa has nothing on me.
We are determined to make a change.
Today is the day.
We must remember why we're here on this planet. It's our duty to love it and protect it, to make sure that she's here for our children and our children's children. We must be the change we want to see in this world, because we are all earthbound. Period.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Welcome our ladies. So I think it's only fair that I at least start out to say why I'm hosting this panel, again, as I'm not a woman. I am an asset manager, and as an asset manager, I'm a model manager. So we don't directly invest in securities. We work with managers that do that for us, but we run the models with those managers, and we do the capital markets assumptions. And I have a bias that has grown over the last really 5 or 6 years, because as we started speaking to our male managers, or as I like to say, our pale stale male managers, about climate change and ESG and the risks that we were facing, we got poo-pooed a lot, and we got discouraged. And what I found in speaking to our women managers was really a deep interest and engagement. I felt over the years, and I have a background in kind of conscious evolution as a master's program, is that women have a better time adapting when things are changing very rapidly and very quickly, and a lot of men dig in a little bit more. And I know I'm generalizing, but especially in the financial industry, you find a lot of people that won't own up to their mistakes or what isn't working anymore. And we found a lot more receptive voices around the issues that we want to address for our clients with the women managers that we work with. So that's why I'm doing this panel. We're also running a lot of breakout sessions from 1 to 5 this afternoon in room 402. I'm going to start with an introduction by each woman, but also have them answer the first question, which is, what got you into addressing climate change or sustainability? And you could answer that from a personal perspective or also from a corporate perspective, depending on where you sit at your firm. And we'll start with Ariane.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Hello, everybody. So I started in 1988, which sounds like a very long time, and I worked at a variety of very large firms in asset management. One of them in Los Angeles, probably the biggest success story on the West Coast. And looking at how we grew from 0 to 50 billion in a matter of 5 years, and with a fantastic track record, I started to ask questions. And this is only 15 years ago, mind you, but there comes a time in life when I think we all become more conscious of what is really going on, not only around us, but into the future and for the future generations. And looking at performance and seeing a lot of tobacco, a lot of firearms, a lot of casinos, a lot of things I kind of objected to, mining, which I invest in, but mines that probably had children working in them. I started asking a lot of questions. I was very lucky in 2013, I was hired in Paris ahead of the climate agreement to launch Carbon Zero, which was the first of its kind. It was really a net zero concept, at the time very novel, best in class, reducing carbon. But I decided, coming back to New York City, where I had worked for 20 years, to do it better. So I launched Veridien with the help of my colleagues who are here, to address decarbonization and the urgency to address climate change, not by having net zero solutions, but really having companies in our global equities portfolio that help decarbonize and address the crisis.
Thank you. Heather, I love the name of your company too, Scopefour. A lot of people are still trying to figure out what Scope 1, 2, and 3 are.
That's right.
And you've already leaped ahead of all of them and started Scopefour Capital. So give us a little bit of your background and the focus.
Thank you. I thought it was a clever name until I realized that most people, just the lay people, don't know what Scope 1, 2, and 3 are. So we kind of start by talking about what reduced emissions are. But I've been in the investment industry for almost 20 years, and about 5 years ago, clients started asking us about how we think about climate and incorporate climate into portfolio from a risk perspective. And we didn't have a lot of great answers, and that kind of led me down this path, and I became really engaged in what climate meant from a risk standpoint and also an opportunity standpoint. With risk, there is also opportunity. And began to invest my own personal capital and private and public markets, and realized that there were a lot of public market, specifically strategies that were more kind of tech strategies, and so really felt it was important to focus wholeheartedly on decarbonization and the solutions and public companies that are scaling those solutions as business models. And just personally, since you asked personally and professionally, the film that we just saw, I kind of felt that way. I've been able to travel all over the world to emerging countries, and what inspired me to launch Scopefour is I actually took a bike trip to Cambodia, and all of the things that we kind of saw in Kenya, I saw a lot of that in Cambodia as well. And initially I was thinking, okay, it's going to be a bike trip through nature, and instead I was almost assaulted with all of the pollution and the trash in the waters, and it was so viscerally upsetting for me that I felt it was really important to kind of dedicate the rest of my career to shifting that narrative.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks.
We kind of divert a little bit here because we've started with companies that have been started by the first two women. You did not get a chance to start Schroders, but you do a lot of great work there. So share with us your journey a little bit and Schroders.
Schroders are started in 1800. I'm a vampire, so I've been around since then. No. Yeah, so Schroders is a very old firm. We're London-based, and we have about $920 billion under management, so quite large. And I am the head of sustainability for North America for Schroders. What I would say is I have a really purely investment and market background up until fairly recently. I was an investment banker. When I came to Schroders, I worked in commodities futures. I worked in emerging market bonds. I was a macro market strategist, and then I worked in quantitative equities. But it's kind of the home that you're in, right, that affects who you become. And Schroders, over the course of the sort of almost 15 years that I've been there, has been working its way to sort of full ESG integration across that entire AUM. We are, because we're UK-based and have a big European client base, we're thinking about these things on the basis of obviously client demand, quite a while ago. And so when I was on these investment desks, we were becoming integrated. So I was sort of, going through that process of learning how to use the tools, how to perform active ownership with companies, benefiting from the research that our sustainable team was doing. And so, over time, it just became part of, how could you invest in any other way? In other words, how could you not assess those risks? Climate risk, nature risk, those are real investment risks to companies. How could you look at a company and sort of say, well, I'm just not going to look at that part? You can't. And then in terms of active ownership or engagement with companies, again, how could you possibly put your money into a company and then not take the time to understand what they're doing, to help advise them? You can't just sort of sit on your hands and hope they work it out. And so it became, I think, culturally at Schroders, for me and everybody else, just embedded in what investing means. Now, over time, because the client demand has developed, there's also kind of, it's a bit of a pyramid. We've gone from just the ESG integration to truly sustainable product, and then impact product, where we have clients who do want to have impact with their money. That's a subset or kind of certain types of clients, but actually every client wants to know what the impact of their investment is. They want to understand how their money performs and what kind of externalities, right, it might fund. So I think that kind of cultural evolution has been really important to me. And so when the opportunity opened up to take that role at the central desk, I thought, well, I've been doing it all along in the investment context. I feel like I have a great affinity for it, and I really love the firm, and I want to sort of move us forward. So like I said, for me, it's very tied to sort of good investing. I will give you the personal story, though, because I didn't have one until fairly recently. So I was in London, of course, away for 2 weeks on a business trip, and I got photos from my husband of my daughter dressed in my, she's 8, so she borrowed a few things from my closet, and she had a Schroders canvas bag, recyclable. She had a Schroders recycled paper, a notebook. She had the aluminum Schroders water bottle, and she had dressed up as her hero. And she said, my mom is a hero to the climate or to nature because she makes sure that money moves towards things that help the environment and not hurt it. And that was very sweet. And clearly she's been paying attention. So that, I said, hard-nosed as an investor, but yeah, there's that part too.
So Rebecca, in the theme of kind of shifting how these different structures can be set up, you work with Builders Fund, and I want to hear personal, but also we know that Builders Fund has been going through transitions on how they're trying to lead as well. So we'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. So for me, I started my investment management career at Goldman Sachs, kind of traditional wealth management. Over the course of, several years, there was more and more interest, particularly from families, I think, in aligning some of their investments, particularly on the family foundation side, with their missions. I've always worked with families and family foundations. And so it was really a journey of kind of figuring out the, fossil fuel-free investing to ESG and corporation investing to sort of truly aligned, proactive, thematic impact investing. And really just over the course of my career, I think both kind of the client interest and the availability of opportunities to do that snowballed, and I just kind of increasingly leaned into that area. When the opportunity came up to work with my current principal, Lucas Walton, who is dedicating really all his resources to what he hopes is to develop a more humane and healthy planet, it was just an opportunity that I had to jump at. And I think, it's just, there is a passion behind it, there is a purpose behind it. We are still, as Marina said, sort of hard-nosed investors, but you feel like you're doing something more with the assets. We are addressing very urgent problems across trillion-dollar ecosystems, oceans, sustainable food and agriculture, renewable energy. And what we've done within Builder's Vision, so we are a family office, but we define ourselves as an impact platform. And under the hood of Builder's Vision, we have multiple pools of capital that we can use to address problems sort of wherever the need is. So we have a direct investing arm, S2G Ventures, which does sort of early stage venture to growth investments across our 3 thematic areas. We have Builders Initiative, which is a philanthropic foundation, so they're doing both grant making as well as impact first investing, so sort of willing to be maybe the first in and help seed the market, emerging managers, diverse managers. And then Builders Asset Management, which is the asset management arm where I sit. And we are very focused on being financial first investors, but also dedicating as much of our portfolio as we can to thematically aligned impact. So we have billions of dollars in impact strategies. Our goal is to get to 100%, but we will not compromise on financial return. But I just say, what I love about it is there's, it gets me out of bed in the morning. There's constant learning. Like, we don't have all the answers. We have to collaborate and learn with others. We can't do this alone. And I think that just speaks to, what gets me excited in the morning. So.
Awesome, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about portfolios. I think when a lot of people hear or think about climate, the first thing that comes to mind is kind of an EV transition or just what the IRA bill is doing, and it's just batteries and technology, but obviously there's lots of other issues that climate affects. We heard this morning from Rachel Roboshati about the racial justice issues and climate justice issues. So when you think about building your portfolio, what are the focus areas that you're really concerned with?
So we believe to address this climate crisis, it's important to look at the entirety of the problem. Where do emissions come from? It's not just coal plants. There's a good series of 20% buckets that come from building construction or agriculture, and of course transportation, which is not just cars, there's also ships and trucks, which is a huge problem. So there's actually a lot of opportunities. So we make sure we look at the entire space. But I think more important, to answer your question, it's really important to not treat any of these sectors, including mining, differently just because they're impactful or in vogue or because we're doing the right thing, and assign very rosy growth prospects to a lot of companies and sectors that are inherently cyclical. So you never want to overpay for anything. It's always about valuation, always. We invest in global public equities, so the last thing we want to do is underperform. Returns are everything. But there are a lot of opportunities because the tendency is for a lot of fund managers to focus on the next quarter or frankly, what the media is saying about the Fed, interest rates, what's happening with inflation, stagflation, so they get distracted a lot. So you can see entire sector of the market that are trading at extremely low valuation, not necessarily in the US, I want to say more abroad. And so you have to constantly look at everything. There are times when, yes, semiconductors are doing extremely well in the portfolio. And frankly, you have to have the discipline to sell these stocks when you believe you've reached a reasonable target price. So you always have to have that in mind.
Thank you. Heather, let's dig in a little bit to Scopefour, and at least since we approached it in the first question that people are still trying to figure out Scope 3, maybe you can at least touch on what Scopefour is, but then also the strategy of the fund and how you're addressing these issues.
Oh yeah, sure, of course. So Scopefour is all about avoided or reduced emissions. So a lot of corporations are able to calculate their emissions internally through Scope 1, 2, and 3. And frankly, Scopefour isn't an official term, but it has been talked about a lot more recently. And for us, we think that decarbonization is really where the alpha opportunity is. And so we like to invest in the picks and shovels, if you will, of decarbonization. So, you know, we're all talking about being investment first, and I very much believe that this is a multi-decade secular trend, but it really doesn't matter what I think. There are also over 70 countries and over 5,000 public companies that are committed to net zero, and with that, there's going to be a mass infrastructure change across all sectors and countries. And so I very much align with what you said. At Veridien, we want to look at the problem holistically. We've actually broken the way that we invest into 6 different themes. A lot of the same themes that you addressed, in addition to the circular economy, so how we're thinking about waste really matters. What we call the discretionary consumer, so how people can vote with their dollars. And also something that we call sustainable ecosystems, and that's about land, water, and agriculture. And it's a little bit harder, frankly, to invest in that in public markets. And then just maybe the last thing I'd mention is we do try to take a science-led framework. Right now, if you look at all of the universes and indexes out there, I just don't think they do a great job of addressing decarbonization. So we decided to create our own universe. It's about 3,000 global public companies that are all mapped to climate solutions. And we have a list of solutions, or a taxonomy, if you will, of what we think are the most commercially viable and currently impactful climate solutions. And that's really our starting point as we begin to dig into the portfolio. And then things aren't as rosy in the short to medium term, kind of to your point. And so we do like to rotate around the different themes based on where we think the economic opportunity is. Mm-hmm.
Marina, I'd like to touch, because we were speaking about public companies with the first 2 conversations, a little bit on the impact side of Schroders and how you can address issues through the pre-public markets, because there you have a little bit more length of time, and you're not being measured as shortly as some of Schroders' public funds are being judged and measured.
No.
So love to hear a little bit about that.
Fair enough. Okay, that's not what I was expecting. That's okay. Well, so maybe I'll kind of go a little bit backwards, but I'll get there, I promise.
Awesome.
So because we are almost $1 trillion asset manager, and our client base is really varied, institutional investors, a lot of those pension plans, I think we have to think about it in 2 ways. One of them is risk, and the other one is opportunity. And I'll get to the kind of private side as the opportunity, obviously. From a risk perspective, we have made a science-based target ourselves. We're validated. We were the first, and I think still the largest asset manager to have a science-based target. So we're committed. And our Scope 3 emissions, of course, are our investee companies. And so we are engaging across our companies in order to encourage them to make a commitment and to decarbonize. This is the risk part, right? Because there's obviously going to be cost risk for them, regulatory and legal risk, all sorts of risks. So that's kind of what we're working on across the $900 billion of AUM. And then, like I said, we do that with nature as well. So for example, we made a deforestation commitment across our entire AUM, and we're working on getting rid of any kind of commodity-driven deforestation across anything that we touch. And the way we sort of not justify, but explain that to our clients who aren't necessarily focused on sustainability is this is the risk side. We're trying to take the risk of, multi-decade trend around decarbonization out of your portfolios over time, because you're a pension investor who might be with us for many, many years. The opportunity side, which is really exciting, is where you can do exactly as Heather's describing, is you're saying, well, okay, this is the trend, and we think that deglobalization, decarbonization, and demographic shift, we call it the 3 Ds, are these sort of long-term trends. So deglobalization, supply chains, decarbonization, obviously the energy markets, and then demographic shift, so how people treat their employees, you have scarcity of labor, all those sorts of things. So we are looking for what kind of strategies can frankly benefit in that environment. And so you think about things traditionally, we would look at sort of, and we still do, kind of energy transition or climate change, you would look at, again, the picks and shovels, the solutions providers, the products and services. But now increasingly, as companies make these commitments themselves, you can also look at climate leaders. So companies that are on the 1.5 degree pathway, they're leading their peers in their sectors, and so just the very nature of that sort of competitiveness over time, they will benefit from. And then things like sustainable food and water, and some of these are private strategies. Sustainable food and water, sustainable infrastructure, circular economy. Everything I wear is from La Tote, which is like a borrowing service, right? So circular economy, you can find these sort of spots, right, around both, like I said, climate and nature, where you can really put capital. And yeah, I think the benefit of having sort of private, right, capital, and we do have our sort of private assets business, and then we have our impact arm, which is called Blue Orchard, is that you have the leeway to find those early opportunities. Usually the client base is much more impact-oriented and kind of, not that they're looking for concessionary, capital, they're looking to not make money, but they have more flexibility in that regard. And you can almost, start things small and like I said, kind of experiment with those opportunities, because this is a very kind of changing space. And so as you try to identify, again, who is going to be benefiting from these long-term trends, it's really exciting to be able to do that in the private markets.
Awesome. Rebecca, you, of all the women on the stage, have the most flexibility across the different segments of builders and how to address some of these problems. So first, a little curious, what are the main problems that you guys are trying to address? And then, is there opportunity at all for companies or even ideas to kind of bubble up through the different segments of what Builders is doing?
Yeah, so Builders is, I think we are quite unique in that we sort of operate as a very integrated ecosystem with multiple pools of capital, as I mentioned, and we're sort of able to look at opportunities as they come across and think about, what is the best way to invest in this opportunity and or to address the problem. So we have collectively as an organization spent a lot of time across our three thematic verticals of oceans, agriculture, and energy, coming up with what are the interim outcomes that we want to accomplish by 2030, and what are the long-term outcomes that we want to accomplish by 2050, using our capital, but also using our tools of partnering with our entrepreneurs, with our fund managers, with our grantees, amplifying the work that they're doing. So it's not just using our capital sort of as a tool for leverage and amplification, and looking at each problem and saying, do we address this with philanthropic dollars, with impact first dollars, or do we address it with commercial capital to really lean in and scale the commercialization and implementation of solutions? So I think that's really exciting. It's really unique. We work very collaboratively. Where I sit on the asset management side, it can be very hard to invest in a pure play way in a oceans fund at scale. There just aren't many that are kind of market rate and or at scale. So what we're doing is we're seeding that market in our Impact First LLC portfolio, with the hope, and we're still early, so we haven't proven it yet, but with the hope that some of those will succeed and grow and scale and can graduate to the portfolio that I oversee. So it's sort of this nice, we call it kind of the flywheel effect. We think we can do more with the sum of our parts than if we were sort of each operating in silos. The last thing I'll mention with the portfolio where I sit, I think it's a bit unique, is that we don't take a carve-out approach to investing in our thematic areas. It's integrated into our portfolio. I have definitely experienced the carve-out approach, and it's sort of a dip the toe in the water and see if it works out, and if it happens to produce financial returns, sort of like, oh, isn't that cute? Our impact portfolio is actually producing returns. I love that we are sort of holding all of our proactive ESG, or I think now we're calling it sustainability, and impact strategies, to the same threshold. First and foremost, it must be a good investment. We've been doing this at Builders Vision for over 10 years, and we can now look back and look at our returns and say, in the public markets, our ESG global equities have outperformed our traditional equities. Our impact-oriented venture capital funds have outperformed our traditional venture funds. So there's a bit of proof in the pudding, and we're very excited to next month publish our first impact report, because we've made this decision to be very public so that we can talk about our work, both to share lessons learned, of which there have been many, as well as share out our successes and, hopefully be sort of an influence and an encouragement to others wherever they might be on their journey of, sustainable or impact investing.
Awesome. So obviously a lot of people came here to hear from women leaders in climate. So I'd like to get really a little bit of advice for women that have come to the session and are listening to the session. Ariane, we'll start with you. Can you really talk a little bit about what it takes to succeed in this space? And also, just as a backup, 10 years ago when I would speak at universities, all the women at the universities and the sustainability club that would come up to me were interested in CSR roles. Now, when I go around and talk at universities, I'm finally hearing a lot of women asking about what are their opportunities in finance and in the capital markets. And that is amazing to me because as much as CSR roles are necessary, moving capital is really what it's going to take right now to solve some of these problems. So, Ariane, if you have advice for people, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I have at least two pieces of advice. First of all, I never thought of myself as, the woman who was by herself in the middle of the ocean of men who were managing all the portfolios, and I was an analyst covering every industry and catering to their every need. I just thought of myself as someone who would do their job as well. And frankly, I'm a big believer that things come to you because of how you're engineered and where you express your desire and your actions speak for yourself. Having said that, I think first piece of advice is when you want something really badly, go and get it. Show that you have the desire and say, I can do this job. I work extremely hard for it. I'm good at this. Look what I have achieved. Show a track record. The more perhaps practical piece of advice is for women, really for anybody, but maybe women especially because the bar tends to be a little bit higher for us generally, is to get as much of a technical baggage as you can without being too specialized, but understanding financial statements. You'd be surprised how few people really spend the time looking at free cash flow statements and really going through those 10Ks and 10Qs. So we have someone in our team dedicated to that, who's not only MIT, but she's also a CPA, so she's a great asset. But I would say that's really important because you can really make a difference and show what you bring to the table, and I think that's always going to be valuable for women. But remember, women have certain distinct advantages, and maybe this is not very PC, but we tend to be better at managing portfolios. I think the data is out there because we always had to multitask. And I mean, running a 50 stock portfolio, it's like having 50 pots on the stove or 50 children, and they're all running around, and there's always something that could happen any day when you wake up and there's a crisis. And also because we're engineered to think about the future. I mean, women give life, and therefore we think of what's going to happen to the children, whether we have children or not. I happen to have 3 daughters. One is an environmental engineer. But we're living the planet in a terrible state. And I actually really think the asset management industry has to get its act together, not just invest in anything that could potentially be net zero. And I wish there were more marinas around to shake up this, or more Scopefours, because we're not going to have a planet left for them to operate. It's not going to be about adapting. It's going to be about surviving as a species. And as an asset management industry, there's so much in action. I could see how portfolio managers are digging their own grave, investing in things that are not sustainable and are destroying climate and therefore destroying investment opportunities. So please, decarbonize.
Heather, advice for women that are trying to get into this space?
Sure. So I have this, I don't know if it's a theory, but if you're not invited at a table, then you should build your own table. And I've tried to approach my whole career that way. So I actually launched a 501c3 nonprofit for women in Southern California about 9 years ago, kind of before the Me Too movement. And I remember when I first got into my career, there were a lot of women who were a little bit older than me that weren't super nice. You know, I think there's this old adage that women don't support each other, and I've always tried to turn that on its head and behave exactly the opposite. And today the organization has grown into this huge, formidable organization that I'm so proud of, and we kind of built our own table, if you will, and it's women leaning on and supporting one another. And the other piece that I would say is that there are so many resources out there today, and there really are these beautiful communities within the investment management world that are looking for women to join us. There are huge initiatives out there that's focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just in pushing assets towards more diverse-owned and women-owned managers, but also in bringing women up through the ranks into leadership roles. And so I think that this time is better than any other time prior to now for women who are looking to get into this space, and it's also a real time to continue to make change in the sustainability world.
Don't fear finance. Don't fear finance. It's not your grandfather's Wall Street, you know? That's my first message. I think women sometimes are daunted, but it's like technical or like, am I good at math? We need all kinds of skill sets, right? Everything. Communication is an important skill set that we need in this industry. I have a baby sister who's 10 years younger than me. She lives up in Portland, and you know, she's very different from me. And for many years had this attitude about kind of, you know, well, you're the dark side, right? Like finance is the dark side. And she's come around because I would sort of say, yes, you know, philanthropy is super important to like help solve the problems in the world. But actually, if you need to bring capital at scale, you have to make it an investment. And governments have a role to play for sure. I'm doing a panel later with some government representatives, but we all have to be pulling together. And so that's one piece of advice. And then the other piece of advice, and I've been giving this to everybody, including women, all the time, is to really lean into what you're good at. I come from an immigrant family where the things that you were good at were dismissed as like a God-given gift, doesn't matter. So you worked on the things that you were bad at. And that's a really terrible way to spin your wheels. If you figure out something that you're good at and someone is willing to pay you to do that thing, do that, right? Because it means that you're almost like never really working. You're just doing something you're good at, and you're lucky enough that somebody pays you to do it. And so I think, you know, like I said, don't fear finance. There's lots of different opportunities. Obviously, we can do things like this in this realm too, that give you meaning and purpose. And the biggest thing is to anchor to something that you enjoy and are good at that exploits your skills.
I love that. I would echo that. Lean into your skill set. My two pieces of advice are: look for the opportunities, especially earlier in your career, that open doors and don't close doors. You know, I think you mentioned maybe don't specialize too much, and I think you want the technical skills, but think with each opportunity in my career, each opportunity is a stepping stone. And sometimes you don't know what is a stepping stone to, but you just kind of know it's a stepping stone to the what's next. And so it sounds very generic, but I think sometimes if you approach opportunities with, will this opportunity open more doors for me? That's been a great way to sort of manage my career and has allowed me to pivot and follow where the opportunities are. I've even at times gotten advice from trusted mentors to, you know, maybe shift this way, but sort of knew in my gut, nope, I think what I'm doing right now, this is gonna set me on a path to more opportunity, and I've trusted that gut, and it's worked out well for me. The other thing is find a sponsor. A sponsor is different than a mentor. A mentor gives you advice, and that is important, but finding a sponsor every place you work, and it can change over time, but finding that person that promotes you, that puts your name forward, that really is your advocate inside an organization, I think just pays dividends. And your sponsor does not always have to look like you. You know, sometimes women seek out other women, and that's great. I think there's the great Madeleine Albright quote, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help women. I love that one. So it can be a woman, but don't limit yourself. You know, look for that person. My sponsor, you know, probably the most pivotal sponsor in my life was a man. So just I think that is another sort of piece of advice in a career to kind of, you know, move forward.
I'm just going to give one piece of advice for men in the audience of what they can do. One of the most important things that I think we can do, because the face of who you see in this industry is critical that we change that, is refuse to sit on panels that are all white males. It's something that I did about 5 or 6 years ago that I switched. And thank you. It's just critical because it's what you see. It's the face at conferences of our audience and who we're speaking to. It really hit me when I went to a diversity panel at a hedge fund conference that was hosted by 6 white males who were all over 70 years old. And that was, I swear, that was the diversity panel. We have about 5 minutes left, but one of the things that we wanted to end with, it's a hard time right now. I mean, if you're thoughtful and you're looking at the world and you're seeing the news every day, it's not the best messaging. I have a good friend, Ron Garan, who's an astronaut who spent 6 months on the space station. He often says to me, there hasn't been a moonshot since Kennedy said we were going to go to the moon. And all the stories about the future of humanity since then have been dystopian. And our movies are dystopian. It's why I brought out Farouk this morning to talk about the hopeful messaging that we can do out in the world. So I'd like if each of you could take a minute to just leave with how you stay hopeful in the face of what we're dealing with. Ariane?
Oh, action, that's why we have the CTF, climate action. I think action really makes you feel good instantly, because if you spend all your time contemplating the disasters in the world, which are accelerating, getting more intense and more frequent, yes, you could have a tendency to just give up. Yeah, I think the asset management industry has a big role to play, but also at an individual level. There's so many things individuals can do at every level. So whether it's in the way they heat their houses, they ventilate their houses, what they drive, what they eat, and asking about the origins of all the everything they're consuming. I mean, the clothes. Because when you think about it, everything since the Industrial Revolution has been built on fossil fuels. Everything has been built with machines that use fossil fuels. And we have another mega industrial revolution happening and lots of opportunities. So there's so much to do, and action is really the answer.
Thank you. Heather?
I very much relate to that. The word I use is agency. I try to give myself the agency to do the best that I can, and that's part of the reason I launched Scopefour, is to give others agency. I did come across an ASU professor last night as I was leaving, and we struck up a conversation, and he was saying that he collaborates with his colleagues on a regular basis about how this crisis could turn the world into something that we want to see, that even though everything seems dire right now, that the way that infrastructure, the path that it's on, could actually completely turn on its head and create a more peaceful world. And he encouraged me, and he said you should encourage others to really think about the world that we're wanting to create and then move towards that, rather than be focused so much on what's happening right in this very moment, because this is just a point in time, and I very much think this is an inflection point for society. And we're kind of in that inflection point. It feels very depressing, but we're going to, I think humans can do a lot of things when they put their mind to it. They can do almost anything.
Marina?
I'm going to go from an investor's perspective. The holy grail for an investor is to be able to see the future. Like, that's what you want to know. You want to be able to see it like something going forward. Here's how I'm going to position for it. One thing that our main operating framework for sustainability at Schroders is based on a tool that we built that measures negative externalities. So like, here you are as a company, you're promulgating your business, you're profiting. What are the negative externalities that you have on people and planet? That can be carbon, it can be, obviously, right, any kind of negative externality. Historically, companies haven't paid for them. They've been paid for by taxpayers and society. Increasingly, companies are being asked to pay sugar taxes, plastic taxes, carbon taxes, minimum wage legislation. It's because governments, regulators, and civil society is not going to turn around and go back and say, oh yeah, we're going to give you a pass. We have different expectations of corporates going forward, and so increasingly those negative externalities will be priced on their balance sheets. That is a vision, right? We can see that. It's not going to turn around. That's one. And the other one is around, I guess, the kind of conceptually of something like decarbonization, right? You see the path going forward. As Heather said, 90% of global GDP is under a net zero commitment. We're not going the other way. And so as an investor, you say, this is exciting because, you know, capital will need to move in this direction. And so I know it doesn't always feel that way day to day. The media does a terrible job. Like, listen to the media less, you know, especially here in the US on this sort of anti-ESG. And it's noise. But what's actually happening, what people are putting their money into, how they're moving forward is something quite different. And again, that visibility into the future is actually really great because it tells us where to anchor and how to go.
Yeah, I live in Washington, D.C., and I have for 20 years. So I think what Marina said, like, just cut through the noise, right? Like, this too shall pass. I mean, I think just, you know, living in D.C., I'm married to a federal government employee. I used to work for the government. I think a lot of what's going on right now, you know, it is political. Most of us who are investors did not sign up to be, you know, part of a political battle. I think we have, you know, scientific proof of what we're doing is moving in the right direction. I think being here, Climate Week in New York City, like, we have global leadership behind this move towards, you know, decarbonizing and a lower carbon economy, and that is the path we are on. You know, to ignore it, I think that, to quote the treasurer of the state of Oregon, is like ignoring gravity. And so I just think you just kind of keep doing what you're doing, knowing it's the right thing, and not spend too much time getting mired in the negative, the noise, because this too shall pass.
I want to thank all of our women on our panel today, and you can, I think, find them all for a little while after for questions, and grab them in the hallway and soak up all of their knowledge, and excellent. So thank you so much.